The elevator doors closed on Bryce Cross's stunned face as my phone started buzzing. Mason Clark's name flashed on the screen. I stared at the cardboard box in my hands. 28 years of my professional life reduced to personal items and a dead plant, and answered the call. Wade Pierce, where are you? We're all waiting in the lobby, ready to make history today. I'm Wade Pierce, 54 years old, and 30 minutes ago, I thought I was about to announce the biggest IPO in Cross Technology's history. Instead, I was riding the elevator down with my belongings, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. There's been a change of plans, I said, keeping my voice steady despite feeling like I'd been sucker punched. I'm no longer with the company. The silence on Mason's end was so long I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then, what are you talking about, Wade? This isn't some kind of joke. I've been terminated, effective immediately. Terminated? On IPO announcement day? His voice pitched higher. That's impossible. Nobody fires their director of business development on the biggest day in company history. The elevator chimed softly as we passed each floor. I watched the numbers descend, each one taking me further from the executive suite where I'd spent the last 3 years orchestrating this $800 million IPO. No joke, Mason, just reality. I suggest you speak with the company's representatives about how they wish to proceed. The elevator doors opened to the marble lobby of Cross Technologies. Through the glass windows, I could see Mason Clark standing with his team from Summit Capital, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing in obvious confusion. These were serious people, investment bankers, lawyers, executives who'd flown in from 3 different time zones for this moment. Behind Mason's group, I spotted Bryce Cross near the reception desk, probably having taken the stairs to make his grand entrance for the ceremony. Bryce, 32 years old, Stanford MBA, and son of our CEO Beverly Cross. The golden boy who'd just destroyed his mother's company because I wasn't wearing a tie and represented everything he thought was wrong with traditional business approaches. I walked out of the elevator, carrying my box like some kind of corporate refugee. Mason spotted me immediately. His expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he processed what he was seeing, his primary contact at Cross Technologies walking out with his belongings in a cardboard box. He ended the call and strode toward me, his expensive suit and confident demeanor barely masking what I could see was growing panic. Wade. He pulled me into a brief hug as if physical contact could somehow make this nightmare make sense. What the hell is happening? We're supposed to announce in 20 minutes. The press release goes live at noon. Our board is already here. I took a deep breath, very aware that Bryce was watching our exchange from across the lobby. The kid had that smug satisfaction written all over his face, the look of someone who'd just flexed his authority and was enjoying the results. Afraid not, Mason. Your lead contact just got fired. IPO's off. Mason's face hardened as he followed my gaze to Bryce, who was now approaching us with the confidence of someone who clearly didn't understand what he'd just destroyed. You did what? Mason's voice carried across the lobby, causing several of his advisors to look up from their phones and documents. Bryce's expression began to shift from smugness to confusion as Mason's words registered. Behind him, I could see the entire Summit Capital team, 8 highly paid professionals who'd been working toward this moment for months, staring at him with growing disbelief. I was just enforcing company standards, Bryce stammered, suddenly looking less like a Stanford MBA and more like a child who'd broken something valuable. He clutched the employee handbook like some kind of shield. His appearance violated our professional dress standards during an executive presentation. No tie, plus his whole approach represents outdated thinking. We need innovation, not old-school methods that don't fit our company culture. The words hung in the air like a bad joke that nobody was laughing at. Mason's expression went from confusion to something much darker. You fired the director of business development of an $800 million IPO because he wasn't wearing a tie and you think his approach is too traditional? It's about modernizing our workplace culture, Bryce said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Professional standards and forward-thinking leadership matter in today's market. That's when Beverly Cross appeared, practically running from the executive elevator with several board members trailing behind her like worried assistants. She moved with the quick, purposeful stride of someone who'd just realized her company was about to implode. Mason, I'm sure we can sort this out. Her voice carried that forced cheerfulness executives use when everything is falling apart. Wade is incredibly valuable to us, and this is clearly just a misunderstanding between departments. but Mason had already turned away from her, speaking quietly to his team. I caught fragments of their urgent conversation, words like respect for their own people and if this is how they treat their veterans and due diligence on company culture. I stood there silently, watching 3 years of my work dissolve in real time. 3 years of late nights, weekend calls, missed dinners, and careful relationship building. 3 years of understanding both companies' needs, navigating egos, structuring terms, and building the trust necessary for a deal this size. All undone because Beverly Cross's entitled son thought dress codes and generational bias were more important than business relationships. Beverly approached me, lowering her voice to that confidential tone executives think shows sincerity. "Wade, please, let's discuss this privately. Bryce is new to his executive role. He was overzealous in applying policy. We can absolutely fix this situation." "There's nothing to fix," I replied, making sure my voice carried far enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "Your son made a decision based on company policy and his vision for the future. You supported that decision by remaining silent when it happened. I accept it." Mason turned back to face our group, his expression grim. Our investment agreement was with Wade Pierce personally. He structured this entire IPO, understood what both companies needed, built the relationships, negotiated every term. Without him, he shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, but Summit isn't comfortable proceeding with this arrangement." Beverly's face went pale. "You can't just walk away from months of work. The contracts are ready. The due diligence is complete. The press release is scheduled to go live in 15 minutes. "Actually, we can," Mason said calmly. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to something, then showed it to Beverly. "Page 23, Section 6 of your own IPO agreement includes a key person clause. Wade Pierce is specifically named. If he leaves Cross Technologies before closing for any reason other than documented illness or death, Summit Capital has the right to withdraw from this agreement without penalty." The irony was perfect. I had insisted on that clause specifically to protect the IPO if anything happened to me. Now, it was the very mechanism that would destroy Cross Technologies. "Wade wrote that clause," I heard one of our lawyers whisper to Beverly. He was the only one who caught its significance during the legal review process. Mason extended his hand to me, his grip firm and respectful. "Wade, when you decide what's next for you, call me. Talent like yours is rare, and Summit appreciates people who understand how business really works." And with that simple handshake, Mason Clark and his entire team walked out of Cross Technologies' lobby, leaving behind a stunned silence and the wreckage of what would have been the company's biggest triumph in 15 years. I nodded once to my former colleagues, people who'd sat in that conference room and watched Bryce humiliate me without saying a word, then walked out too, ignoring Beverly's increasingly desperate calls for me to come back and talk this through. Outside, the spring air felt different somehow, lighter. Despite the weight of what had just happened, no job, no immediate prospects, watching my greatest professional achievement crumble in real time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. My phone started buzzing before I even reached the parking garage. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails, all from people who'd heard the news or seen the Summit team leave the building. I turned it off without reading any of them. Whatever crisis was unfolding back at Cross Technologies, it wasn't mine to solve anymore. The drive home gave me time to process what had actually happened. In 30 minutes, Bryce Cross had managed to destroy more value than some companies generate in a decade. The kid had probably cost Cross Technologies its IPO, thousands of jobs, and millions in shareholder value. All because he couldn't handle seeing a 54-year-old executive without a tie who represented everything he thought was wrong with traditional business approaches. At home, I did something I hadn't done on a weekday in probably 8 years. I poured myself a bourbon at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, then sat on my deck watching the neighborhood. When was the last time I'd been home before dark? When had I last noticed that my neighbor was renovating his fence or that the tree in my backyard was actually blooming? It had been 2 years since Linda died. 2 years of throwing myself into work even harder than before, using the IPO project as a way to avoid dealing with the empty house and the guilt of not being there during her final months. I'd told myself I was building something important, securing our financial future. But Linda was gone, and what was I securing it for? That evening, the news alert started rolling in. Cross Technologies IPO collapses. Stock plunges 42%. By morning, it would drop another 26% as the full implications became clear. The business press was already running speculation pieces about acquisition targets and fire sales. I felt a pang of guilt thinking about the good people at Cross who would suffer. Janet in accounting, who always stayed late during quarter end. Landon Hayes in product development, who'd been there since the company was half its current size. These weren't the people who'd sat silently while I was humiliated. These were hard-working folks who just wanted to keep their jobs and support their families. But a stronger part of me recognized that I hadn't failed them. Their leadership had. For the next week, I ignored my phone completely, let everything go to voicemail. Colleagues, journalists, headhunters, former clients, everyone wanted to know what had happened and what I planned to do next. I wasn't ready to answer those questions because, honestly, I didn't know. Instead, I did things I'd forgotten I enjoyed. I slept 8 hours a night without checking email. I cooked actual meals instead of grabbing takeout on my way home from the office. I called my brother Owen, who lived in Phoenix and who I'd barely talked to in months, despite promising we'd stay in better touch after Linda's funeral. "You sound different," Owen said during our second conversation that week. "More relaxed." "Yeah, well, unemployment will do that to you," I laughed. But it wasn't bitter. It was actually genuine. "I've never heard you laugh like that," he said. "Being fired might be the best thing that ever happened to you." "Maybe," I admitted, staring out at my backyard, where I'd discovered I actually had a pretty nice garden that my landscaper had been maintaining without me ever noticing, but I can't believe how it ended, Owen. 28 years of my life, 28 years of 65-hour weeks, missed dinners, canceled vacations, building relationships, understanding markets, creating value. "And what did they give you back?" he asked. "What did they sacrifice for you?" I thought about that. The truth was nothing. I'd given Cross Technologies everything. My time, my expertise, my relationships, my health, my personal life. I'd even missed Linda's last few months because I was so focused on this IPO, telling myself it was for our future when she was dying in the present. And the first time Beverly Cross's spoiled son decided to flex his authority, they'd let him destroy me without a word of protest. "You gave them everything," Owen continued. "And they let some 32-year-old kid with a fancy degree and a famous last name throw it all away because of what? A dress code violation and generational prejudice?" He wasn't wrong. I started taking walks around the neighborhood, something I hadn't done since Linda and I used to walk together in the evenings. I noticed things I'd missed for years. Which houses had been renovated, where new families had moved in, how the local coffee shop had changed ownership. The world had kept turning while I was buried in spreadsheets and conference calls. During one of these walks, I ran into Tom Henderson, a neighbor I'd barely spoken to despite living across the street for 12 years. He was about my age, recently retired from a career in manufacturing. "Heard about what happened at Cross," he said. "Brutal way to end a career." "End?" I found myself saying. "Who said anything about ending?" He looked surprised. "Well, I just assumed at our age you'd be thinking about retirement anyway." Our age. There it was again. The assumption that 54 was somehow the beginning of the end rather than the middle of something bigger. The same attitude that had allowed Bryce to dismiss my experience as outdated thinking. "I've got a lot of good years left," I said. "Maybe it's time to use them differently." That night, I finally turned my phone back on. 127 missed calls, 89 text messages, 43 voicemails. I scrolled through them, deleting most without reading. But one name caught my attention, Beverly Cross, calling from her personal cell number. The voicemail was desperate. "Wade, we need to talk. The situation here is worse than we initially anticipated. Much worse. The board wants to meet with you. Please call me back." I stared at the phone for a long moment, then poured another bourbon and went back out to my deck. Whatever crisis was happening at Cross Technologies, they'd created it themselves. The question was, what did I want to do about it? For the first time in weeks, I was starting to get an idea. 2 weeks later, Beverly finally managed to reach me directly. I'd been screening calls, but I recognized her personal cell number, and curiosity got the better of me. "Wade." Her voice was tired, strained in a way I'd never heard before. "We need to talk." "Do we?" I asked, genuinely curious what she might have to say. "The board wants to meet with you. The situation here is..." She paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "It's catastrophic. Stocks down 68% total. We've lost 4 major clients. The business press is running daily speculation about bankruptcy timelines. We need your help." I almost laughed. Help with what exactly? Fixing the company? Bringing Summit back to the table? Saving Cross Technologies? I let that hang for a moment. The same Cross Technologies that fired me for not wearing a tie? Her sigh was heavy with what sounded like genuine regret. That was a disastrous mistake. Bryce has been removed from his executive position. He's been transferred to a junior role in research. I've been formally reprimanded by the board. The whole thing was handled terribly, and we know it. I said nothing, letting her fill the silence. Please, Wade. Thousands of jobs are at stake here. People who worked alongside you for years. People who respect you and your work. People who sat silently while I was humiliated, I thought. People who watched their colleague get destroyed by a 32-year-old and didn't say a word. But I kept that observation to myself. What exactly are you offering? I asked instead. Come to the board meeting tomorrow. We'll discuss terms. You can essentially name your price. I found myself considering it, which surprised me. Not because I needed the money or missed the office politics, but because there was a part of me, the part that had spent 28 years trying to save companies and build value, that couldn't quite let go of the challenge. I'll think about it, I said, ending the call. That night, I couldn't sleep. What did I actually want from this situation? Money? An apology? Revenge? By morning, I had my answer, and it was bigger than any of those things. I called Beverly back at 7 a.m. I'll meet with your board, I said, but not tomorrow. Today, this afternoon, and I'm coming with conditions. What kind of conditions? The kind that ensure this never happens to anyone else again, and the kind that give me the freedom to build something meaningful. There was a long pause. Okay, 2 p.m. I'll be there. As I hung up, I realized I was smiling. For the first time in weeks, I had a plan. 4 hours later, I walked into the Cross Technologies boardroom wearing the exact same outfit I'd been fired in. Khakis, dress shirt, blazer, and deliberately no tie. The message wasn't subtle, but then subtlety hadn't worked for me before. The board members rose when I entered, which was interesting. 2 weeks ago, they'd sat silently while Bryce humiliated me. Now they were standing like I was some visiting dignitary. Their expressions ranged from desperate hope to embarrassed discomfort. Beverly looked like she hadn't slept in days. Bryce was notably absent. "Thank you for coming, Wade," the chairman said. He was Garrett Stone, who'd been on the board for about 6 years, but had never said more than hello to me before this crisis. "We really appreciate your willingness to discuss the situation." "Let's skip the pleasantries," I replied, taking a seat at the table where I'd presented quarterly reports dozens of times. "In the 2 weeks since I left, your stock has fallen 68%. 4 major clients have announced they're reviewing their contracts with Cross. The business press is running daily speculation about acquisition targets and fire sales." Uncomfortable shifting around the table. A few board members exchanged glances. "You've lost the Summit IPO, which was your last realistic chance at going public without major restructuring. Even if I could somehow convince Mason to reconsider, and that's a significant if, the terms would be substantially worse now. Summit holds all the leverage. We understand the gravity of the situation," Beverly said. She looked older than I remembered, like the stress was aging her in real time. "But we have to try something." "Do you?" I asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've already made your choice. You chose Bryce's judgment over business relationships. You chose generational bias over experience. You chose silence over defending the person who'd spent 3 years making this IPO possible." The room went quiet. I could hear the air conditioning humming. "Why should I help any of you?" I continued, looking around the table and meeting each person's eyes. "Every single one of you was in that conference room 2 weeks ago. Not one of you spoke up for me or questioned what was happening. You sat there and watched your colleague get destroyed by a 32-year-old kid, and you did nothing." More uncomfortable shifting. The chairman cleared his throat. "We made a terrible mistake," he admitted. "A catastrophic error in judgment. What would it take for you to consider returning?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder my attorney had helped me prepare the night before. "These terms are non-negotiable terms." I placed it in front of him, watching his eyebrows rise as he read the first page. He passed it to Beverly, whose face went pale, then to the other board members. I could see their expressions change as they absorbed what I was asking for. "This is extensive," Beverly said finally. "Yes. Full reinstatement as chief operating officer at triple my previous salary, a permanent seat on this board, complete autonomy over strategic decisions, a substantial equity stake in Cross Technologies." I paused, and a public statement acknowledging the error in my termination. "Triple salary seems excessive," one board member objected. "Does it? How much is Cross Technologies worth today compared to 2 weeks ago? How much would successful completion of the Summit IPO have been worth?" I let that sink in. "I'm essentially asking for a small percentage of the value that was destroyed when you let Bryce fire me." Garrett read further into the document. "This clause about new ventures, you want majority ownership of any new business initiatives you develop while employed here. 65% ownership for me, 35% for Cross Technologies. Any resources I use will be properly compensated. All arrangements documented meticulously." "That's highly unusual," another board member said. "So is firing your director of business development over a tie on the day of your biggest IPO announcement in company history," I replied. "Consider it insurance against future misunderstandings about whose judgment matters more, mine or whoever happens to be the CEO's relative." They looked at each other. I could see the silent conversation happening. Glances, slight nods, barely perceptible headshakes. They were calculating how much Cross Technologies was worth without me versus how expensive I'd become with me. Finally, Garrett spoke. "If we agree to these terms, you'll attempt to bring Summit back to the negotiation table?" "I'll try. I can't promise success. The relationship damage is significant, and Mason Clark is a smart businessman. He knows you revealed something important about Cross's decision-making process when you let Bryce fire me. Trust once broken is hard to rebuild." Another round of silent board member communication. Garrett pushed the contract back to me. It now bore his signature. Done. One by one, the other board members signed. Beverly was last, her pen hovering over the signature line for a long moment before she added her name. "When can you start?" Garrett asked. "I already have," I said, standing up. "I'll be in my old office making calls. I suggest you all prepare for a very difficult few months. Rebuilding what was destroyed won't be easy or quick." As I headed for the door, Beverly called after me. "What about Bryce?" I paused. "What about him? He's still employed here in the research department. Will that be a problem for you?" I smiled. "Not for me, no. He'll have to live with the consequences of his choices. I'm more interested in building something new than dwelling on past mistakes." That night, I called Mason Clark. As I'd expected, he wasn't particularly interested in revisiting the Cross deal. "Your company showed its true colors, Wade," he said. "The decision-making process, the priorities, the way they treat their own people. Why would Summit want to tie our future to that?" "You wouldn't be," I said. "You'd be trusting me, and I now have the authority to guarantee what I promise." After 2 hours of conversation, Mason agreed to consider a revised proposal. The terms would be much less favorable to Cross. Summit would pay probably 40% less and demand significantly more control. But it was something, a foundation to build on. Over the next month, I worked to stabilize what could be saved while also pursuing an idea that had been forming since that first day back. The unusual ownership clause in my contract hadn't been random. I had a plan that went far beyond saving Cross Technologies. It started with a simple observation. I wasn't the only professional man over 45 dealing with workplace bias disguised as modernization. It started with a conversation with Landon Hayes, our head of product development. "I need a small team for a side project," I told him over lunch. "Something experimental. Can you spare a few people for evening and weekend work?" Landon looked intrigued. "What kind of project?" "Professional menswear. Specifically business clothing designed for executives over 45. Clothing that adapts to different workplace cultures while maintaining authority and comfort for our demographic." He seemed surprised. "That's not our industry." "No," I agreed. "But it's a market with problems that need solving, and my new contract gives me the freedom to explore new verticals. Think about it. How many men our age struggle with workplace dress codes that seem designed for 25-year-olds? How many of us feel like we're being pushed aside for superficial reasons?" Within a week, Landon had assembled 4 of his best people. They were excited about the creative challenge, designing clothing that could transition between formal and casual, traditional and modern, all while addressing the specific needs of older professionals. Comfort without sacrificing authority. Style without surrendering dignity. We called it Executive Edge, and it was going to change everything. 6 months later, Executive Edge was ready for launch. What had started as evening brainstorming sessions had become a sophisticated operation. We'd partnered with a manufacturing facility in Tennessee, developed proprietary fabric blends that offered stretch and breathability without looking casual, and created designs that solved real problems professional men over 45 faced every day. I began wearing our prototypes to work, suits that could transition from boardroom formal to business casual with simple adjustments, shirts with convertible collars that worked with or without ties, jackets with subtle removable elements that adapted to different settings. No one commented directly, but I noticed people watching, asking questions about where I shopped. The day before our official launch, I called a company-wide meeting. Everyone attended. They knew something big was coming. As I walked to the front of the conference room, I spotted Bryce sitting in the back row, trying to blend into the wall. 6 months in a junior research role had significantly diminished his presence. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "Today marks an important milestone for Cross Technologies. We've weathered our crisis, stabilized our core business, and now I'm ready to announce something transformational." Beverly sat in the front row looking confused. This wasn't on her agenda. For the past 6 months, a small team has been working on a special project, one that represents not just innovation, but a response to a real market need. I clicked to display our first slide, the Executive Edge logo. I'm proud to introduce Executive Edge, professional men's wear designed specifically for executives over 45, addressing the unique challenges we face in modern workplace environments where experience is sometimes undervalued. Murmurs swept through the room as I showed images of our designs. These aren't just clothes, they're solutions. Every piece addresses specific challenges professional men in our demographic face daily. Comfort that doesn't compromise authority, style that adapts rather than dictates, quality that reflects experience and success. I gestured to my own suit. Take what I'm wearing. Standard business suit at first glance, but watch. I demonstrated the adaptability, collar adjustments, removable elements, style transitions. The room watched in fascination. No more buying multiple wardrobes for different workplace cultures. No more anxiety about arbitrary rule changes. No more choosing between looking professional and feeling comfortable. I advanced to financial projections that made several executives sit straighter. Market research indicates significant demand among our target demographic, professional men 45 to 65 with disposable income and workplace authority. We've secured manufacturing partnerships, distribution channels, and a marketing strategy built on authentic storytelling. I paused, meeting Bryce's eyes across the room. Every Executive Edge piece includes a tag explaining its inspiration. The story of how a single arbitrary judgment about professional appearance nearly destroyed a company and an $800 million IPO. Complete silence. Everyone knew exactly what I was referencing. That incident revealed something crucial. When professional capability becomes secondary to superficial compliance or generational bias, everyone loses. Executive Edge offers a practical solution while making a statement about the value of experience. I clicked to our launch announcement. Thanks to my employment contract granting majority ownership of new ventures, Executive Edge operates independently with cross-retaining 35% ownership. All development costs have been properly compensated and documented. The launch exceeded every projection. Press coverage focused on both innovation and origin story. Fired over a tie. How one 54-year-old executive turned workplace humiliation into a $50 million business became a viral headline. Orders overwhelmed our initial inventory within 48 hours. Professional men across industries responded to the practical designs and the message behind them. We weren't just selling clothes, we were selling dignity, relevance, and professional confidence for men who'd been told their experience was outdated. 2 weeks after launch, Mason Clark gave an interview mentioning Executive Edge. "I wear their suits now," he told a business reporter. "Best combination of comfort and authority I've found. I appreciate supporting a company that values substance over superficial judgments." The interview went viral. Orders tripled overnight. 3 months later, Executive Edge had become a phenomenon. We expanded into accessories and workplace essentials. Each piece maintained our core philosophy of professional dignity for mature executives. Our financial results spoke for themselves. Executive Edge generated $12 million in first quarter revenue, more than Cross Technology's core quarterly profit. The 35% ownership stake had become the company's most valuable asset. Meanwhile, the restructured Summit deal finally closed. Much less favorable terms than the original, Summit paid 40% less and demanded significantly more control, but enough to ensure Cross's survival. Mason made his continued support conditional on my leadership, a point he emphasized publicly. On the anniversary of my firing, I did something I'd been thinking about for months. I called my daughter Sarah. We hadn't spoken since Linda's funeral, and that conversation had been strained. Sarah blamed me for not being there during her mother's final months, for choosing work over family even, when it mattered most. She wasn't wrong. "Dad?" Her voice was surprised but not unfriendly when she answered. "Hi, sweetheart. I know it's been a while. I wanted to tell you about something that's been happening, and to apologize." I told her about Executive Edge, about the success, about finally finding work that felt meaningful beyond just making money. But more importantly, I told her about learning to slow down, to notice things, to value relationships over revenues. "I should have been there for Mom," I said. "And for you. I thought I was building security, but I was just avoiding what mattered most." "That sounds incredible, Dad. The business, but also what you're saying about priorities. I'm proud of you for learning that." "I was wondering," I said, my heart pounding like I was asking for a first date, "would you be interested in helping with the marketing strategy? You always understood branding better than anyone I know." There was a long pause. "You want to work together?" "I want to spend time together." The work would just be an excuse to rebuild what I should never have let slip away. She laughed, and it was Linda's laugh, bright and genuine. "Yes, I'd love that." 6 months later, Sarah had joined Executive Edge as our director of brand strategy. Working together had given us something we'd never had: shared purpose, beyond family obligation. She brought fresh perspectives on reaching our demographic, while I provided industry knowledge and hard-won wisdom about professional resilience. The company continued growing beyond anything I'd imagined, but more importantly, I'd found something I didn't even know I was looking for: a way to turn the worst professional moment of my life into something that mattered to thousands of people like me. One afternoon, Bryce appeared at my office door. He looked different, humbler somehow. The entitlement was gone, replaced by something that might have been wisdom. "Wade, do you have a minute?" I gestured to a chair. "What's on your mind?" I wanted to apologize, not just for firing you, but for everything I said that day. About your approach being outdated, about needing fresh thinking. He looked down at his hands. "You were right about business being built on relationships and respect. I destroyed both in 5 minutes because I was so focused on proving I belonged." I studied him. The boy who'd humiliated me was gone, replaced by a young man who'd learned something valuable about consequences and growth. "Apology accepted," I said. "What matters now is what you do with that understanding. I've been following Executive Edge, the success, the impact. You took something I meant to hurt you and turned it into something that helps thousands of people." He paused. "I was wondering if there might be room for someone who's learned from his mistakes." I thought about it. The kid had cost me everything once, but he'd also inadvertently given me something bigger than what I'd lost. Sometimes the people who hurt us most teach us the most about who we really want to be. "Send me a proposal," I said. "Show me what you've learned and how you think you can contribute. No guarantees, but I believe in second chances for people who've earned them through genuine growth." A year later, Bryce became our director of digital strategy, bringing technological innovation that balanced perfectly with our traditional values approach. Working together taught both of us something valuable. Wisdom and energy aren't opposites. They're complementary when combined with mutual respect. Executive Edge grew beyond clothing into a movement celebrating the value of experience in a youth-obsessed business world. We established mentorship programs, age-inclusive workplace consulting, and scholarships for displaced older workers. The revenge, if you could call it that, wasn't Bryce's humiliation or Cross's struggle. It was transforming a moment meant to diminish me into a platform that elevated others like me, sometimes the most times powerful response to someone trying to make you smaller is growing so large they can't help but see your value. But the real victory wasn't in their recognition. It was in finally recognizing my own worth and using it to help others do the same. At 55, I'd learned that the best chapters of your life can begin with the worst days of your career, if you're willing to write them yourself. Thanks for staying with my story. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear what struck you most: the setback, the comeback, or discovering that your greatest professional disaster can become your most meaningful success. Age isn't obsolescence. It's expertise with perspective. When workplace bias disguises itself as modernization, the real loss isn't your job. It's the company's competitive advantage built on decades of relationship building, crisis management, and understanding what actually matters in business. The most powerful revenge against those who underestimate you isn't proving them wrong. It's proving them irrelevant. Success that outlasts their memory of dismissing you transforms personal vindication into lasting impact that helps others facing the same battles.